Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 59th and best episode of the Hashcast. And as always, I have a guest way cooler and way more interesting than myself. And tonight I have a guest who I have the pleasure of working with every single day. My coworker, Shawn. How are you, man?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me. I can't believe you said all those nice things. I don't know if any of them are actually true.
Yeah, well, they're officially on the record now, but don't bring it up in the weeklies, because I might deny everything.
Well, can you add it to my wiki officially so people know that I'm officially the best?
You are officially the best. No, thanks so much for coming on, because we've known each other for a while. We literally work together. Out of all my guests, I talk to you the most probably, because they make me every week.
You have no choice, sir.
I have no choice. We have to work on projects together, but it's been great. So I figured, I've heard your story, bits and pieces there, and I was like, I have people on my show every week that have cool stories, and one of my own coworkers has a super cool story. Why not get to do it on the show? So here we are.
That flatters me so much, because I never really thought that I had much of a story, and then the funny thing, after I started with this job, where I thought my story was uninteresting and I hadn't really done anything all that super special, when people reach out and they do want to know, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe there was a bit of a journey there, and it is more interesting than I even give myself credit for. Yeah. So like I say, I'm genuinely flattered to be here.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, I've been talking to you because I know you, but for people who might not know exactly who you are, can you give us a quick introduction on who you are and what is it that you do?
Yeah. So, Shawn, the last name is Petraschuk, which nobody ever gets right. I work with you at Evolve PR. I'm one of the PR specialists there at Evolve. I've been, about a year and a half now? So I feel like I've just settled in. I feel like I've got a super, super huge amount to learn yet. I'm hardly even at that point where I feel super settled in the job. But I've been there for about a year and a half, been involved in the industry for just over 7 years now. Got in a little late because I'm pushing past 40 already. Yeah. So I was in my 30s before I even kind of took the jump into this industry to take me here. So, yeah.
Well, that's I think what kind of makes it interesting and why it resonates with me, because we kind of have not the same path, but similar paths into the industry. But you're still the cooler, and you've been doing it for a little longer. Like you said, I've only been with Evolve for 3 months, even though it feels like a year and a half. in a good way.
Your first stressful job, when you've got a timeline and you're pulling your hair out, that's when it feels like a real job, and you're like, it's been 84 years.
Exactly. But before we get to the Evolve story, I think I want to rewind a little bit, because what was your first step into the industry where you felt like, hey, I am part of this cool industry, now that you've probably been following for quite some time before that? How did that happen? What was the push that made you give that a try?
So, it was kind of funny. I've always been, somebody who plays games. I went through a period, I would say, in my mid-20s or something, where life got in the way, and I just didn't get to play like I wanted to anymore. Got back into it into my 30s, and basically, I was on a forum, and I was just a regular user on a forum, and I would follow on what they were doing. And way back when they launched the Wii U, I was one of the only people on the forum that actually picked the console up. So I just decided on a whim. I'd never really been much of a writer or anything like that. I just reached out to the website and I said, "Yo, I have a console. Give me a shot." I already bought a copy. I think it was New Super Mario Brothers U was the game. Let me review this. I'm going to volunteer my time. Let me review this. And if you guys like it, maybe you'll bring me on a more permanent basis. And that was November of 2012.
And what was the forum, if you want to share that?
It was, way back. It doesn't exist anymore. It was called Canadian Online Gamers.
Okay.
And previous to that, it was called XCL. So it basically started out as a bunch of guys who would meet up on Xbox Live together, right? Because then when it was more of a new thing. And so I wrote my first review in November of 2012 as a volunteer, and they're like, "Yo, we like what you're doing." And that's kind of where the journey began. I didn't feel like I was part of the industry or anything at that point. For me, it was just like, oh, cool, like something was published, and, I had a chance to have other people read it, and it felt really good. But then what I saw was just this crazy wealth of untapped potential on the website at the time. I think they were getting, give or take, about 4,000 hits a month. Like, they weren't doing crazy traffic or anything. And I just I have this OCD thing for statistics and improvement and stuff like that. And as soon as I saw where those numbers were, and they brought me in and they were allowing me to give them ideas, that sort of thing, I started pushing to improve the site and help the site get better. So within 6 months from there, June of 2013 was my first E3, right? And I think when I hit that, when I got to go to E3 for the first time and walk in those doors, I mean, you remember your first time, I'm sure, right? First time you walk into like one of those halls and you just see the scope of it, you go, holy crap, like I've done it. I'm finally arrived. Like I'm actually goosebumping a little bit, like no joke, because it's such a vivid memory for me. And I think that's when I first felt that like, wow, I'm actually a part of something. And again, even then it was just, I was still volunteering to write for the site. I wasn't an owner or anything of that nature. But it was kind of like the kickstart that I needed to really start pushing for the site to improve, really start pushing for myself to improve. Because I started shortly after that, I went into doing freelance work, so I picked up my first freelance gigs where I was making money for writing. And I was like, holy crow. I mean, nothing that paid my bills, right? I mean, I still had to work full time on top of that. And I think that's kind of where my story maybe gets a little bit interesting, because I get approached now quite often, and whether it's in, I keep my DMs open on Twitter, right? Like, so, someone comes into, slides into my inbox or something and just kind of asks me for advice. And the first time I got asked for advice, it just really struck me, where I went like, oh, wow, this really was a journey, and some people have paid attention to it, and there's people out there who respect it. I mean, it really made me feel good. And then in turn, it really makes me want to give back to people as well, and impart that advice, even if who knows whether or not it's good. But I mean, I think E3 again, E3 was my first, like, holy crap, I'm part of this. But that was really in the whole scheme of what took me to being at Evolve, was kind of just the very, very beginning of it, because in the scope past there, I ended up being a 25% owner of that particular website. And then 2 partners moved on. So it was me and my business partner, Trevor. We rebranded the site. So it was Canadian Online Gamers way back in the day. And we rebranded it to COG Connected, which is still running today. And in that time, we rebranded about 4 years ago, give or take. And in that rebrand, we took the site to over 1 million hits a month, which again, in the whole scheme of things, compared to some of these other sites out there, isn't insane. But for a small, independently run website out of Canada, we were doing really, really well. And we paid particular, especially myself anyway, I was very particular about paying everybody that worked for us, stuff like that. We were never able to pay a lot. I mean, it's just the nature of the game. But before I ever took home any money, or Trevor took home any money, we always made sure that our writers were paid, even if it was a nominal amount, because you have to show people that you at least appreciate the work that they're doing. Right. So took it up to about 40 writers that write for COG. And a lot of them are still there now after I'd left. And it was 4, almost 5 years of basically running a website 7 days a week, where I would put in 5 to 8 hours a day. And then Monday to Friday, or whatever my Monday to Friday was, I drove a city bus in Vancouver, and that was what paid my bills. So my days were 16 hours long, and it was just business from front to back. But I had a drive that the site was going to grow and we were going to take it somewhere. And then, kind of opportunity knocks, and I took the jump to come to Evolve. And I haven't really looked back since. It was a little hard to let go of the website. I'm not going to lie, but I haven't really looked back since. It's, it felt like a culmination of a lot of really, really hard work that kind of turned in my favor.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. It's quite an impressive story because you put in a lot of work. How did you manage to balance that? Because for a lot of people who I see who are trying to do the same thing, like they have often a day job to, like you said, to pay the bills, and then there's the hustle on the side. But like the risk of burnout as a content creator / full-time worker is pretty high. How did you manage to juggle that?
So I had a few things that worked in my favor. I think probably the biggest one that worked in my favor was my business partner was super supportive. Mm-hmm. And so we would make sure that, usually it was all hands on deck, but we were really good of, hey, I need some time away. And if somebody did, if Trevor needed time away, I'd step up. And vice versa, where if I needed time away, Trevor would make sure that things were covered. And, we recruited other team members to kind of help fill the gaps, but nobody really had the same. I mean, we had a lot of really dedicated people, and a lot of them are still at COG now. But nobody really has the same dedication as the owner, the person who's putting in the money and really putting in that drive to make it succeed. So there was that, a little bit of trade-off with each other to make sure that we were, helping each other when we could. And then my other support structure was just at home, where other business partners didn't necessarily get the spousal support. Sometimes, there would actually be, arguments and stuff. And I totally understand that because you have to be able to balance your family time with that. But my wife was super amazing, where she's always believed that the second I took that first review and kind of jumped in, and then within 6 months transitioned that to my first piece of, a check that showed up at my door for writing, she said, you found your calling. This is what you're supposed to be doing. This is the industry you're supposed to be working in. You've never been passionate about anything else as passionate as you are about this. You push, you do what you need to do, and I'll make sure that I support you. And I mean, granted, there were times where it got tough, where, time was at a premium, but always having somebody have your back and believe in you. I mean, she was the first one to praise me to other people too, really lifts you up, right? Yeah. So I think that was probably my biggest amount of balance was knowing that if I had to take a little bit of time away from the family time to focus on something on a timeline or an embargo, review that needed to be done, that support was always there and never questioned. Not once did I ever get you're neglecting us or anything. Yeah. She just really believed in me, so it helped.
That is amazing. First of all, props there. How long was that timeline? I'm not sure if you really mentioned that from that first review to you letting go the site.
So November of 2012 was my first review, and then letting go of the site and coming to Evolve was January 2018.
Okay, yeah. So I didn't do the math in my head because I know you said 2012, but that's a pretty substantial path, right? And in 2013, you said first E3. How important were those successes? Because I think a lot of people who try to do this again feel like they're running into that wall, over and over again, and it's never really taken off. And that's where a lot of people just stop or give up. What kept those? What kept you keep swinging that head against that wall over and over again until it cracked?
It's funny, because I don't know.
No.
I do and I don't. I think it was just that I'd found something that I cared about so much that when we saw small successes, and we did, where we'd see maybe an article would go really, really big, right? And suddenly, and that would give me the boost I needed. I'm like, oh, we had a really great month. We're really breaking through. And that would kind of happen month over month over month. And if I was ever disappointed, Trevor would build me up and vice versa again, right? I can't say enough about leaning on my business partner, that we both built each other up. So it was small successes all along the way. Like the first time we cracked 1 million hits in a month, we almost lost our minds. That was a huge goalpost for us. And every time you hit another goalpost, there was always what's the next one? Yeah. There was always that constant push. But to be fair, I'm making it sound like it was all sunshine and unicorn farts and all that, but it wasn't really, because there were those downtimes as well. Managing a team of 40, and I mean, if any of them listen to this, they know that I love them dearly, but it's like sometimes managing 40 people, you know, yes, they're all adults, but you might as well be running a daycare, right? Because people have their own lives and stuff like that. So like, I'm not meaning it in a way like they're children. It's just there's so much going on, and there's so many people all over the place, and trying to be the one or two people that are keeping that in line can be really tough, sometimes disheartening when you're reaching out for the help that you need to keep a site above water and not necessarily getting the response back. There were just really, really tough times. But it's just persistence. I mean, I always knew that this is something that I wanted to do, and that if I gave up, I would be really, really, really mad at myself. And my wife would be mad at me too. Like again, because of that belief that she put into me. So, I mean, it was just a series of small successes, and every time you hit a new one, it was just that little bit of kick in the ass to go, okay, well, what's our next goal? What can we achieve now? How can we be better? And I mean, we failed plenty, right? I mean, not every step was a good one, you know, and back to the drawing board, fights. Me and my business partner would fight like crazy and stuff, but we would always come back to the drawing board respectfully and realize where our missteps were.
Yeah, well, I just running that site and setting that up with a whole bunch of freelancers and people writing for because they want to write is impressive enough. But for you as a person to have that skill as a writer, so because you mentioned like I was never really a writer, but still here you are running a site and finding that first review that's good enough for people to pay attention to, bring you on board to the point where you own the site basically. Where does that creativity for you come from? Where do you draw it from? If you said you've never been a writer, it's hard to believe, almost.
Well, I mean, so when I was younger, I think I was a bit more of a writer. I did creative writing, that type of thing. And then I was also involved in a lot of theater, so I was able to be creative there. I did a lot of acting. And I think really what it was, when I say like I never really considered myself a writer, it's because I'd moved away from it. Life got in the way. I was pretty young when my oldest son was born. I'm only 41 right now, and I'll be 42 in September. And my oldest son's already 22, which makes me feel old, you know. So I had to focus on being responsible, being a dad. So I moved away from the more creative aspects of you know, things that I enjoyed. I was just always really good. I was really good with my words when I would write a story or something like that. Like I was able to put my words on paper very well, but I just didn't consider myself someone, I wasn't about to sit down and write a novel, you know what I mean? Or maybe a short story, you know, at best. I think really is the way it translated is that when I picked up that first review, it was almost like I had rekindled something a little bit. And I went, oh, this is some of that creativity that I'd been missing, and then that I really wanted for a long time. And again, I mean, if you tend to be a creative person and you lose it, you know what I mean? One, it's hard to get back, but then when you do, that spark that kind of comes back is really big. And it consumed me. I mean, for lack of a better term, I mean, obsessed sounds like strong, you know what I mean? When people say they obsess about something, it's obviously, sometimes it's taken in a negative light, but I obsessed about it, and the site became my every waking moment of how do we improve, and an outlet for me. And it was much needed because, I mean, at the time, I wasn't really satisfied in what I was doing for a living. I really felt trapped. And I felt that way, you know, again, for another 6 years before I was able to move on from there. So, I mean, you know, having that outlet of being able to be creative, being able to write. I loved writing op-ed pieces and stuff because a review, you're kind of regurgitating. But when I got to do an op-ed and I really had an opinion and I really wanted to get a message through to people, when I was able to do that, that was so extremely satisfying. And those types of things are what kept me balanced and gave me a reason to kind of keep trucking as I tried to balance both of those. You know, let's not kid it, you know, or beat around the bush, and I guess in a sense, in that they're both jobs. Even though I wasn't getting paid any money, that's a job, right? Keeping a site like that alive is hard work.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because I had kind of the same experience when I was working When I moved to Canada, I moved from a very creative position to a very technical, safety-oriented job where I had zero room for creativity. So it kind of went on the back burner for quite some time. But you can't hide that. You can't hide being a creative person. You need an outlet for that. So that's when I started writing freelance in video games as well. And like I said, once you turn that on, and I think what's also important is that once you get feedback and notice you have the potential of an audience, then you can't stop. Like then.
Yeah, well, I mean, and once you get that, like, I mean, that first hit, when somebody reads something that you wrote and you get that feedback where maybe you influenced a purchasing decision, who knows, but they take the time to comment and tell you that what you wrote affected them in some manner, like that's fuel. That's fuel. And that's kind of like the one thing that's going to keep you going. I mean, comment sections for the most part were something I avoided. I don't miss them. Like people go like, what do you miss about journalism? I'm like, not comment sections.
Yeah.
But, I mean, when you have that outlet of being creative and somebody actually reads it and takes it to heart, that really fuels you forward and go, where you go, okay, I have a voice and people are listening. And that makes you feel really, really good too.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's quite an impressive story that you have, because being a self-made person in this industry is like there's enough people who did that, but it's often still like, okay, I knew this person there, I knew this person there. Building this from scratch is always very impressive, and especially because you are so passionate about it. I always love a success story when people like do the work and it pays off, right? So you're here, you have a successful site, then all of a sudden you jump the fence, because PR is like a completely different thing. One, it takes a completely different skill set. Two, it's a different world. How did that come to it? Did you always have something like, I could do this from the other side as well, or was that an opportunity that just worked out?
So I think it was always in the back of my mind that it was maybe somewhere that I'd be able to go. I mean, I always thought like, if this doesn't work, where can I transition kind of some of the skills that I'd learned? And I mean, to put it in perspective of how much I hated my job, driving a city bus is not anything that it's a bit of a glass ceiling kind of thing. You're kind of just going from A to B all the time. And so job fulfillment is really a zero. It doesn't really exist. So I wasn't happy with what I was doing. And I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm long gone. So even if anybody who works for that company ever saw this, I would. The day that I applied to work for Evolve, I faked sick. I just didn't want to go to work that day. I didn't have the mental capacity to deal with angry passengers, stuff like that. And so they put something up on Twitter, and I kind of just went, well, what the hell? Why not? Like, I'd thought about it for a long time before that and never pulled the trigger. So I happened to be home that day. They put up an ad, and I hadn't written a resume in like 7 years. Yeah. I had to go to a resume writing site and a cover letter writing site, and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm old. Old people don't know how to do this. And quickly threw something together that I felt comfortable with, and fired it off kind of on a whim. Not, I wouldn't say I wasn't expecting a response. I really thought that I'd built up a skill set and a rapport. I mean, I already knew Tom. I mean, I'd worked with Tom for years, from the other side. And I'd also developed a very good relationship in terms of, I mean, you're starting to kind of see that from the terminal side, right? Where, we have people who are really great with terminals and then there are people who are not. Yeah. Like we were the type that we wouldn't take a code if we couldn't cover it. We would cover everything. I would submit everything. So it was just a very good working relationship already. Yeah. So I kind of expected to get the call. I didn't expect to get the job. Yeah. And that's kind of what really, really took me. I mean, I was so nervous the day that I interviewed. And, but you know what? I got asked a lot of really interesting questions, and I was put on the spot a few times. But I feel like even though it's a different thing, like going from PR to journalism, I think the skill set, not so much the journalism side, the writing definitely helped, don't get me wrong. But I think the time management skills, the people management skills, that sort of thing, the relationship building, because I was the person who was making all those phone calls or dropping all those emails to the PR people and stuff. I'd also built up those interpersonal skills as well. So even though it's two very different jobs, there were some certain transferable skills that took me over. What was the big surprise was when I made the hop, I went, I don't know how to do this fucking job. Excuse my French. I have no idea what I'm doing right now. Yeah. And that was kind of like my wake-up call where I'm like, whoa, I'm really lucky to have gotten here, but I have a lot of work to do. This is not, I'm not going to be able to just coast by because I'm friendly. You know, I'm going to need to learn here. And I mean, I felt Tom was really, really good. And to be fair, everybody on the team at the time, Jesse, Ryan, Bryden, Carly, really helpful in me battling my imposter syndrome where I go, well, I don't know if I belong here. Like, I took this job, but this might have been a mistake. I think about a month and a half in, 2 months in, when the work started to, you know, hey, you're past your, well, not past your learning period, but here's some more responsibility. And I mean, I hit those points again at 6 months, maybe at a year. I mean, and even now when I've got more responsibility than ever, I think it's almost a constant battle for people. But I don't shy away from it. I definitely acknowledge it where I go, okay, yeah, I'm feeling imposter syndrome. Like maybe I don't belong, but you take that 5-minute step back and you go, but I'm here. There's got to be a reason for that, you know? So, but the transition into PR was really hard. It was genuinely one of the hardest things I've ever done. But, I'd say that's the rewarding feeling that I get from the work that I do. I've never had that in any other job like I do doing this. So it just reinforces for me that I really made the right call. Yeah,
I'd say so. I mean, it's we're not sure if Tom's listening, but it's a good place to work. But like I said, it's a different perspective on the industry. Like, what was the biggest learning moment or like revelation you had when you saw it from the other side?
Well, I mean, I think honestly, it's just like in the capacity that I was working in this industry in, like the way that I was dealing with PR, I just had this false sense of security that I knew what PR was. I knew what the job was. I knew what I would have to do. And I'm like, I'm really good at emails. Like, well, that's not even scraping the surface. I don't want, I mean, I want to be very particular in that, like, I don't want to talk down to any other PR agency by any stretch of the imagination. But there are some that are maybe a bit more corporate minded that their job very much does entail sending emails, making contacts. It's what I expected. What I found with Evolve, and I mean, and you're seeing this too in terms of like hands-on, is like, I feel like we're like the guerrilla PR company in a sense, right? Where we get our hands dirty like a lot of other PR companies maybe don't. The independent ones probably do that are in a similar level to us. The corporate ones are taking a message from a really high up company and saying, this is the message, get it to the people. And they're like, okay, that's what we're going to do. Where we're, you know, we have small developers and publishers coming to us and saying, what is our message? Like, and that's a very different thing. It's a super different dynamic. And then I think when I started realizing the weight of that on my shoulders, when, you know, somebody's remortgaged their house and, you know, they've given up everything they've got, you know, because they've worked their whole lives or whatever, and they've got a family at home, and they're like, they threw everything into the ring for this game that they're developing. And they're like, so what's our message? How do we sell this? And you're like, holy crap. That pressure started to get to me a little bit. But I mean, then I realized too that one, we've got a really great team at Evolve that if we want to lean on somebody else for help or for ideas when we're stumped, there's always somebody there who's willing to do, you know, to go the extra mile and kind of give you that assistance. I think it's what makes us special in a sense, and that we're always able to go to 15 other people, and between 15 or 16 of us or whatever, we are always coming up with like the craziest, most unique ideas. And some of them are super off the wall and almost stupid. And we kind of buy into them anyway.
Those are my ideas.
But aren't they the best though? You don't ever want to discount any idea. right? But just when you realize that somebody is counting on you to make their game a success, at the end of the day, a game's success is the game, right? I mean, when it comes to review scores, I have no influence over that. No. But getting people to pay attention, making people notice, it's a lot harder than I ever gave it credit for. Although I do feel that even in the year and a half since I started, the industry is changing too. There's so much more going on that the way that they sold games or marketed games 3 years ago, which isn't that long, versus today are polar opposites. It's a very different environment, and you need to be trickier than ever. You need to be smarter than ever. You need to be able to find those things in games that no one else is seeing and go, but that's a talking point, and make it interesting when there's 20 other games that are very similar out there over the past 2 years, and you're like, well, how do we make you stand out? So yeah, like basically like once all those pressures started to kind of sit on my shoulders, I think that's kind of when I started going, oh, I might be in over my head. And I mean, obviously I'm still here a year and a half later and I haven't been canned. So I must be doing something right.
We'll see what happens after the episode airs. But
oh, son of a...
No. What is the... Like, so you've been both sides now. You see, the differences. Because for me, every day is still a learning moment. From like, oh, that's how that works on the other side. And you kind of touched on something about how some people throw in everything to make their game a success. The biggest insight for me is the more you learn about this industry and from different angles you see it, is how often there is so much passion behind the project that as a writer you might not always take into account, because you test a game, review a game where you write about something, that went wrong, that is shitty. You kind of lose that human perspective of game development. Now that you're on the other side, did that become more clear, or were you one of those people that already had that figured out?
I think I was always one of those people that had the aspect. I think I think what you're saying. I mean, I've always been one of those people that had the aspect figured out that there are real people who make games. And I mean, I remember a few moments when I was still running the site where a writer would submit a review and the game was bad. Game was genuinely bad, and it deserved criticism. You know what I mean? It deserved to be, roasted over the coals in a sense, right? Where this game is bad, but in the content and in the writing, there were more personal statements where the developers were lazy, like that kind of thing. And I always put a hard stop on that. I'm like, this is not a commentary on the people behind the games. This is a commentary on the game specifically, because I don't feel that anybody, or at least, sure, there are people out there who are maybe trying to make a fast buck, but I don't think anybody who's passionate about games, who are going to take the time to go out there and make a game, do so haphazardly. They put their all into it. You might not like it, and that's cool. Like, that's totally fine. I mean, that's your prerogative. But they worked hard, and you need to respect that. And I mean, again, not every game is good. I mean, this is obvious. We all know that. But I mean, I just don't feel right about going out there and attacking the people behind games. Let the game be the subject matter, and that's completely cool. So yeah, I feel like I always understood that there were real people behind games. And so I don't know if my attitude necessarily changed, but what was more eye-opening is just being able to talk to the people behind games and understand the struggles that they're going through, and understand that when, and there's times where I've been frustrated, like with a client maybe that is really particular and really pushy, like I want this and I want that. And as angry maybe as I get in the moment sometimes, there's frustrating moments in any job. As frustrated as I might get with their demands, I guess, I also always have to take that step back and go, this is somebody who put their entire livelihood on the line to make something, to create something. And if we didn't have people with those kind of guts, we wouldn't have any of what we enjoy, any of what literally gave you a job, gave me a job. So I get really frustrated right now, to be completely honest. I get really frustrated a lot of the time with social media. I get really frustrated with the gaming community. I'm not a negative person. I don't feed into it, and I don't like building that type of attitude up. but it can be really overwhelming in terms of attacking people behind games and not understanding that there's a real human being who poured their heart into something. People forget. People tend to forget. And I mean, I feel very thankful that I don't forget, you know what I mean? But I also, I mean, I find it very disheartening sometimes that there are people who do. And I mean, you probably realize probably more than anybody, I mean, especially on the Evolve team, I mean, you used social media as a catapult to kind of bring you here. And now you're in a similar position to me where you're like, I've worked really friggin' hard and holy shit, I've got a job in the industry. I took my passion and now I have a job. Like, so you understand more than you know, some other people that social media is super, super important to what we do. But for me, as important as it is, I want to maintain an online presence. There's times where I look at what we see in our daily feeds and I go, nah, I don't want any part of it right now. Like, and feel like I need to step away. But it's such an integral part to what we do. It's an everyday thing for me. So balancing that can be really, really hard because there's days where it literally, like, it makes me sad. It kind of turns my gut when I see the way that there's infighting and stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like you said, I've been in the trenches for quite a bit, and I made the trenches my own in a way, and tried to turn it into something positive. But what I always like to tell is, I started this whole thing because I wanted to do a little good in industry. Even though my real start was maybe a little too sassy, maybe a little too not edgy, but it was like, you know, always make the joke about stuff that might not have always been good to joke about. Like I remember making a joke about Disney Infinity closing. I was like, well, so much for Infinity. And then years later, I walk into John Finacci, and he's like, oh yeah, I know who you are. You're funny, but you're also kind of mean sometimes. And comment kind of stuck with me. I was like, you know, it's got a point because it's easy to make the joke, right? Because you have your thousands of followers, and then it makes a lot of people laugh. But then in the moment, for you, it's just a joke. But someone on the other side who just lost his job reads that tweet, and it's a completely different story. Now we get along fine. Just don't get me wrong.
Which is good, but I mean, even you have the wherewithal and the knowledge to go, what gets the retweets? Yeah. What gets people talking? And I mean, and as sad as it is, a lot of the time it's the negativity. A lot of the time, that sassy comment, people are like, ooh, edgelord, and that's gonna spread. But I mean, alternative to that, I mean, and I think you've probably seen this too, every once in a while, one of those extremely positive outlooks are the ones that get that kind of attention. It's sad that it's like going to a NASCAR, thing. I mean, you're driving in an oval, it's boring. You're not there to watch people drive in a circle. You're there to go, I hope people crash, right? I mean, it's the same thing with Twitter. Yeah, and Twitter is very, very similar, but there are a few of us. There are a lot of people that I would go like are very positive influences. There are a lot of people that I've learned to avoid or just maybe not interact with because of negativity. But there's a lot of positive voices out there, and I really feel that if those positive voices are continuing to do what they do and not kind of give into that easiness of being, the one-off, throw the joke at somebody else's expense, the better off we are. And I truly believe that. I mean, some people, I've gotten DMs at times, just as an example, actually, last E3, so not this one past, but previous, it was my first one working for Evolve. And so it was my first time going to E3 where I was paid. I wasn't paying out of my own pocket, out of passion. It was just like, I'm going there and I have a job. And when I come back, I'm going to get a paycheck. Like, holy shit. So I kind of just took stock of a lot of people that I admired on my journey at that point in time. And I just called them out. I kind of started a Twitter thread where I was just like, I appreciate you for X, right? Yeah. You helped me build my confidence because X, blah, blah, blah. And I actually had people slide into my inbox telling me that I was kissing ass, that I'm like, why can't we just be nice to each other without there having to be like an alternative, like I'm pushing for something more than just being nice or just acknowledging somebody and letting them know that they're a positive influence on me, right? So Again, I mean, I take it in small doses. I don't let it get to me. I just kind of, I mean, if I was going to impart anything, I would say in terms of wisdom or hopes, I just really hope we could all be nicer to each other.
Yeah. Well, you touched on an interesting subject because sometimes I felt giving a compliment to a stranger feels awkward still. But I'm getting better at it, and I love that idea that you did, like a gratefulness thread. They go by every now and then, and I think they usually do very well. The fact that you get DMs in your inbox is kind of shitty. But the less you give a shit about what people feel about your positivity or like kindness, I think the better we can make this whole, not industry, I think the world in general, but but it's funny how far a small token of kindness can go, because my favorite story for me personally is how I met one of my now very good internet real life friends, Stephen Blomkamp, who I always make fun of relentlessly on the show.
He's a really nice guy. I don't know why you do that. I met him I met him for the first time. You know, it's funny. I don't want to interrupt your story too much. I'm gonna. But I kind of followed him a little bit on Twitter. But when he got his Canadian citizenship, I was super happy for him.
Yeah.
And just his story about how that day went along, and somebody went and gave him a bottle of maple syrup. I'm like, oh my God, that's so Canadian. Yeah. And just having somebody feel super welcomed here, which, I mean, even similar to you, as somebody who immigrated into Canada, there must have been a little bit of resonation there where you went, wow, we're the same.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, because he's generally one of the nicest people I know. But we became friends because we watched the same tabletop show on YouTube. And he was making fan art for that show, and I saw it come by. I never talked to the guy, and I just tweeted him like, "Dude, you're such a talented guy. Like, this artist is making my days amazing." And that's how we got talking. And then I went to Vancouver for work. It was like, when I have a beer, I was like, "Yeah, sure." And since then, we've been like pretty good buddies. But just because I just felt comfortable enough to give a complete stranger, even guy between guys, sometimes still very strange for people. Because that's just how most of our generation has been raised, I suppose. And it worked out. Like, now, good friend, like, you met him. We had a party at his hotel room at E3.
That's right.
Like, a little bit of kindness, and you have free pizza in LA. You never know what could happen. But that's what I appreciate.
It was really neat to me, though, too, chatting with him again for the first time, where. And then this is an example maybe of where people get wires crossed, and I find I actually found it really interesting in that moment. I didn't say anything at that particular time, but in that actual very moment, I felt like all of us are probably very much on the same field, where I've looked up to him like somebody who had influence in this industry, as someone that I would respect. He knows people I don't know. Like, wow, like, he's really got his shit together. And then I meet him, and he's like, I'm a nobody. And I'm like, but you're not. But that's the same way that I would have felt about myself in a sense too. I'm a nobody. Like, what? Like, I go to work like anybody else. Why are you paying attention to me? And when people come up to give me that compliment that I'm that person for them, when I'm not thinking, you know what, you see what I mean? How it's a bit of a circle where two people who have certain amounts of influence feel like, I don't belong here. Like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't belong in this industry, at least not to the level of other people that we're seeing. I mean, like it or not, this industry can be very cliquey. There are people who are at the top who stay at the top. And not that they're exclusionary by any stretch of the imagination, but there are people that seem unattainable. Chances are, when you meet a lot of those people, they're the nicest people you'll ever meet as well. But it's those walls that we build up in our own heads and again, that's where we were talking about imposter syndrome. I don't belong. I don't belong. If you're here and someone is willing to take a chance on you, there's something in your past, there's something either behind you, or there's something in the work that you're doing right now that means you do belong. It's just really hard sometimes to push yourself past that moment, past that I don't belong moment. And when you do, you go like, okay, well, wait, I earned this. And I mean, and I go through that regularly. I mean, I would honestly say probably like at least, even now, a year and a half in, at least once a month, where I approach, where I go, I'm in over my head, maybe I shouldn't have done this. And then I go, whoa, hold up, take a breath, sit back, think things through. No, I belong. There's a reason I am here. And it was just kind of neat meeting Steven and him feeling he didn't belong. and me feeling like he was this like huge, like, super connected guy in the industry. And both of us are like trying to like outdo each other with compliments almost felt ridiculous.
Yeah, that's true. We got to stop talking about Steven, otherwise it's going straight to his head.
The next time he tries to get through his apartment, he's going to have to deflate his own head. He's like, I'm important.
That's true. You hear that, Steven? Your big head. But I do want to kind of, because you mentioned a couple of things, like that there are still people that you meet that feel like, okay, these are the top level people, but actually you kind of already know them. What were some of the people that inspired you through all this, like on both sides? And it helped you like reach your goals.
So when I was on the journalism side, especially as a kid growing up in Canada, I actually very vividly remember the first time I met Victor Lucas. So for a lot of people, I mean, it's funny to me how a lot of people in the States don't know who Vic is. And I mean, for anybody who grew up in Canada, Electric Playground was like part of growing. It was a syndicated show, like you saw it all the time. But it was like somebody working in the gaming industry who took it up to levels that at the time nobody else was doing. Ooh, excuse me. Meeting him for the first time was like super relieving. It was when I was on my way to my first E3. We ran into him at the airport because we all lived in Vancouver, and just sitting and chatting with him and realizing how approachable he was, and him willingly imparting advice on me of like, he's probably had a lot of people who were 5 months, 6 months into, I'm a games journalist, talking his ear off. And yet rather than pawning me off or pretending like he didn't care or whatever, it was a genuine conversation on how I could improve and how I could be better and what was great about this industry and stuff. And I mean, I ran into him, at quite a few events after that, and he always remembered. And again, to me, it was a pillar of like a good example of how to be in this industry, even if you are the one at the top, approachable, friendly, honest, not full of shit. I mean, I have a hard time with like, obviously, like let's say with E3 that just passed, just as an example, we go to all these things every night. Everybody's, out at the JW or whatever. So there are people that I'm going to run into, and I know that I'm going to have a very authentic, very real, very good conversation with, and I'm going to feel like when I walk away from that if I was to, if I wasn't already maybe following them on Twitter or something like that if I reach out, they're going to go, yo, I remember you. That was a really great conversation. Thank you, blah, blah, blah. But then there's those other interactions that feel like a business transaction. And I don't want to say I don't respect that because it feels harsh, but I just don't think, I feel like this industry is built on genuine relationships, and the people who are fake are going to get caught, I think, at some point in time, and they're going to be out from the crowd in a sense. Like, like I ran into Andrea Renee at E3 this year, and she's got her little walker and stuff like that. And I mean, to me, I stopped and I chatted with her, and again, like even through that, I mean, first of all, good on her for not just going like, no, I'm not going E3. Like, I'm crippled right now. She toughed through, and no matter what she was going through, she was super friendly. And then when I asked her about it, like this like is kind of blew my mind a little bit, where she's like, I owe it to the people who allow me to do what I do. I owe it to them to be here. I mean, let's not forget the fact that I love what I do, but they support me, I support them. And Greg Miller's the same way, man. Like talking to Greg, I mean, he's always been an inspiration, and especially it's not in my space. Like I couldn't do it. I couldn't be on YouTube. I couldn't stream. Like, yeah, I could do it in small doses, and I've done it, and I get great reactions because people are like, Shawn, you're funny. You should do this all the time. But I'm like, I don't have that internal energy. You know what I mean? It tires me out. And I was chatting with Greg at PAX West last year, and I asked him, I'm like, how do you always stay on? How do you, like, when do you rest? When do you detach yourself from this entity that you've created? And his response was, he's like, all these people, like the reason I'm here where I am right now is because these people support me. And if somebody runs into me in an airport or out at a restaurant or whatever else, and they are asking for 10 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute of my attention, if the second I lose sight of the fact that I wouldn't be here without them, that's when I start to lose them. I can't afford to turn off what they expect of me in order, if I want to keep my head above water and continue to do what I do. So it was just like this extreme level of gratefulness and realizing that you're nothing. I mean, it might be a bit much, but you're not what you are without the people who support you and who took you there. And so, while I'm not a public facing figure by any stretch of the imagination, right? I mean, my public are the media and the streamers, right? The people that I want to make contact with. But my public, in a sense, those other journalists like you're talking about who are maybe looking for inspiration or like, how did you get where you are? And when they come to me, like I had said, that's why I'm willing to take time out of my day to impart the same advice, because I got here for a reason, and how dare I rob somebody else of their chance? If they're coming to me for advice, I should be flattered, and I should take that time, So yeah, like those people in general, those attitudes that are positive, that are accepting of the fact that they wouldn't be where they are without a little bit of help, a step up here or there. Yeah, they worked really, really hard, but just that little bit of extra help really inspires me, and that's kind of an attitude that I really, really try hard to kind of take into my everyday. I mean, you might think otherwise from my snarky Slack attitude every now and then, but I do most of the time I'm joking. Most of the time.
Fair enough. Well, it's interesting because I've been listening to you talk for a good 15 minutes now, and when I still hear you talk about having imposter syndrome, it's like, shut up, man. Like, dude, like, nonsense. Like, you are such a... like, you've earned your place. You fit in here so well, and I've seen you in action. I've seen you work, and we've hit the parties and we've hit the social events together. I think you are very well established. I think you're extremely good at what you do. And what I always like to ask is, like, you belong here, and like you've made your name for yourself. How would like the 14-year-old or the 20-year-old Shawn who really wanted to get into this back then feel when he would see what you've accomplished today?
Okay, so I don't think 14-year-old or 20-year-old Shawn had their shit together enough to care.
Yeah. I forget how old you are.
Yeah, right. But I mean, but to be fair, when I was 20, I mean, I was, I had a newborn, so my focus was very different. And I very much fell into, well, I have a job to do because, I need to be a responsible parent. And then, got through that. And I mean, my relationship with my kid now is fantastic. I mean, and all that work was well worth it. Oh, man. But, I mean, I think all that said, when I was younger, I had dreams. I wanted to be a pediatrician, which is really funny because I don't like kids that much. I don't know why I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician. So my wife is super fond of the saying that everything happens for a reason. And I'm all like against it, where I'm like, no, everything happens because you work hard and da 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 da. But I think there's like a balance in between the two. I really feel that this is where I was meant to end up. I wish I could have ended up here sooner, but I'm thankful for the life experience I got before that, because it just has always allowed me to appreciate where I'm at even more. Getting this job changed my life in ways that, I mean, some people might be able to understand, but to me, I mean, was massive. So not only did I get out of a job that I'd been in for 8 years that I honestly thought that I was going to do until I retired, like I was like, because it was safe, right? Like I had all the perks that we look for. I had my medical, I had dental, I had a pension and all these things. And I'm like, and I was in a union where I would like, the only way I'm never going to lose this job is if I quit. I will never get fired, anything. So when you've got a family at home, you got a wife, you've got kids, like that's hard to let go of, because you realize you're lucky to have that. But just because I'm lucky to have that doesn't mean that I'm satisfied in what I'm doing. You know what I mean? So getting this job allowed me, one, to move out of something that I was super unfulfilled by, but I moved like within 3 months of getting my job with Evolve, which it might have been ballsy. Don't get me wrong. I was hardly out of my like, whatever they want to call it, my first 3 months or whatever, right? My trial. My house was on the market and I moved, and I didn't move like just, from one town to another in the same area. I moved from Vancouver to Vancouver Island, separating myself from all my friends, into a completely new town where I didn't know anybody, but I knew that this is where I always wanted to end up. I upended everything, but the only reason I was able to do that is because now I'm working from home versus working on the road. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I ever dreamed that this is where I was going to be. And that's kind of the funny thing where you go, well, what would 20-year-old Shawn say? 20-year-old Shawn would be like, yo, dude, you got your shit together. Good for you. Right. But 30-year-old Shawn would be more so of like, because I had my shit together. I mean, I was still doing dumb things and whatnot. I mean, because I think I'm pretty sure men don't grow up until 40, give or take, like within a couple of years, But at 30, it's not like I didn't go to work. I paid my bills and all that sort of stuff. I was responsible, but I wasn't happy. So I think the difference between even 30-year-old Shawn and getting close to 42-year-old Shawn would be like, man, I'm so happy that you found something that actually fulfills you, that makes you get up out of bed in the morning and you genuinely love what you're doing. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, long-winded answer to a simple question, I guess. But I mean, I don't know. At 20, I wasn't thinking about it. 20, I was too busy with other things.
It's still interesting, like the path you had to where you're happy. Like I said, I'm a sucker for a success story, and I see how much you enjoyed it. So that's great. Do you have a 5-year plan? Do you have the old like where do you see yourself in 5 years question?
It's funny. Okay, so I was asked this probably, I don't know, I'd say within 3 months to 6 months after I started with Evolve. And the question was, where do you want to go after Evolve? What's in your view when you're ready to move past them? They're a good, one person that I really actually respected, he's moved on from Ubisoft, but J.S. Avedo was a very big, he always spoke up for me. So I really, really reached out to him for advice. And his first question was, again, what's your move past here? What are you going to do after that moment? And at the time, I was like, I don't know, because this is still so new to me. A year and a half in, I still don't know.
That's good.
But the reason being is, so I'm in a very, I'm very lucky in where I am in life. I made a lot of smart decisions when I was younger. I don't carry any debt or anything like that. Like, my debt is my mortgage. I pay to make sure that I've got a roof over my head, but I don't have car payments. I don't have credit card payments. I don't have all these things. So for me, in terms of what do I need to make for money, I don't need to be a millionaire, and for me to be satisfied, I just want to make sure that every once in a while I can take my kids to Disneyland. And, I just want to be able to wake up and be happy. So that being said, Evolve is kind of where I'm at right now, and I'm not looking past it because I love working for this company, but two, I really love the values that Tom and Candace hold and the way they treat their employees. I would rather than saying I'm going to use Evolve as a jumping off point to go anywhere else. For me, I'm kind of all in and going, I want to be a part of their growth. I want to be a part of, in 5 years. I mean, we were talking about this at work today in terms of maybe we're going to bring on a few new people, and we're watching that year over year growth. And, I don't know maybe what your experience has been, to be honest, is to be a part of Evolve. One of the things that I've really appreciated is watching how other people, without our help, without our poking, talk about the work that we do and how respected we are. It feels really good. It feels really, really good,
Yeah.
but not because we're full of shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like people are like, when we get those comments that come through that are like, Evolve is the best in this business for independent PR. It's not because we've asked them to say that. They're saying that because that's the way that they feel. And to feel like that we're part of that and we're helping that growth, why would I want to go anywhere else?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it seemed almost like a cheat in terms of answering. Like, I don't want to work for Activision. I don't want to work for Ubisoft or anything like that. I'm so super happy here, and I want to see this company grow. And in 5 years from now, I want to be one of the people that, Tom's like, you know what? I want to, like, I started this company. I want to, like, maybe chill out a little bit and take a step back. I want to be one of the people that's still here in 5 years where he's like, so Shawn, take over. That's where I want to be. I really believe in this company. I really, really do.
Yeah, that's perfect. This is not a sponsored ad for Evolve.
No, I know, right?
This is how we feel all the time at work.
I'm just trying to make sure I get paid next pay period. I mean,
that's good.
we heard Shawn was going to ditch us for Ubisoft. Let's cut off his paycheck.
That's going to be a nice clip out. No, but it's fun. Like I said, I'm very happy to see where you are, and then I'm happy that I get to work with you because it's a lot of fun every day.
Actually, I really appreciate. Remember chatting with you just as because we'd messaged a little bit just before you came on officially. We knew that it was you who had been hired and you hadn't started yet. And I remember messaging with you back and forth a little bit on Twitter. And I think it was kind of like, it was one thing that I felt like almost like kismet. Is that still a word? Is that a word people use? But it's just like, but again, like it's really neat talking to you about your story because it was a very similar situation. You built up your brand. I mean, I had a whole website. I had 40 other people do my work for me. You did your work on your own, which is respectable enough in its own sense. You know what I mean? But to have that same situation where we're off doing things that we're not really in love with and working hard for that specific goal. So when you got hired, I was like extremely happy for you because I felt very attached to that story where I was like, that's very similar to me, like really, really similar. You've got a family at home. You can't afford to just make a jump for the sake of making a jump unless it makes sure that the bills are paid too. So when I heard that you got hired and kind of got a little bit more about your story, I was like genuinely super, super happy for you being able to come here. I mean, sometimes I wish that you would turn your pun game off a bit, but apart from that, you really belong.
Never.
Never.
Ain't happening, Shawn. Ain't happening.
I know.
It's literally my job.
It is now, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's awesome. I always like to end, like before we close the show, to ask you for one thing that what's your favorite thing that you put in the world? What did you put into the world that you felt like left the world a little better place than when you found it? Doesn't have to be work related. It can be literally anything.
No. I mean, it's always hard for people, I think, to kind of acknowledge that part about themselves. But I always feel, for me, I always want to leave any space that I'm in. I want to leave that space better than when I found it. And so, I mean, that can go in a million different directions, but maybe let's attribute it maybe to a story. When I was still driving a bus, I was on a very, very busy route, and I was already behind. I was running behind. And if you drive a bus and you're late, when you pull up to every stop, you're going to get yelled at. People are angry or whatever else. And I pulled up to one of the busiest stops we had in Vancouver. It was a SkyTrain station. So there's always a lot of people getting on and off the bus and everything else. And there was this woman, she was sitting on the ground and crying, just crying her eyes out. And she, in front of a bench, there's a bench there and people sitting on the bench, and this woman is sitting there crying. And nobody acknowledged her. Nobody even paid the slightest amount of attention to her. I pull up, I open my door, and I'd managed to catch about 30 seconds of time. I'm like, oh, look, I'm ahead and I'm going to be able to catch up and people won't yell at me anymore, which is always nice when you drive a bus. But everybody got on the bus and this woman picked herself up off the ground because the bench was now empty. and sat there and continued to cry. And I just felt such a human connection. She wasn't disheveled or anything like that either. She was just an average, everyday person. And I throw my four ways, throw my parking brake, and I was driving a trolley bus too. So I don't know if with the trolley buses, we were hooked up to wires overhead, right, with the two poles. And so if another trolley bus came up behind me, for them to go around me, they've got to pull down their poles. It's an ordeal. So I stop, I put on the emergency brake, and I get out of the bus, and I go in, and I sit beside this person, and not caring about the fact that I had 50 people on my bus. They all had places to be, and I understand that. But this person needed someone. I sat beside her. I didn't say anything. I did not say I didn't say one word. I just sat beside her, and I put my arm around her, and she leaned into me and cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. And I mean, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should do anything. I didn't know if I should say anything. But I just sat there with her for about 5 minutes, and I just tear stains around my shirt. And after about 5 minutes, my time kind of had passed in a sense. Yeah. And I turned to her and I said, "I'm really, really sorry. I've got to go. Are you okay?" And she just looked at me. She sat back. She looked at me and she said, "Thank you." That's all she said. "Thank you." Yeah. And I got back on the bus and I drove. And that really affected me in that not only was I very emotionally hit there, but I knew that moment that I'd taken out of my day affected her life in a positive manner. And that's the way that I try to live my life on a very daily basis. I try not to let the negative things that get in the way affect my thinking. You saw the story about the dude at Denny's, and again, I'm not here trying to toot my own horn. I don't want it to be that. It's just, you have to be a positive influence on society if you want to reap the benefits of a positive society, in a sense, right? You need to be that person that's willing to take time out of your day to treat somebody like they deserve respect. So for me, go into a space, make sure that every time you're in that space and walk out of a space, people feel rewarded for you being there. And appreciate your time, appreciate your effort. And that's why, I'll never fall into that negative space. I feel that there's enough people that fill that space, and there needs to be a lot more of us that are willing to take out, carve that out and make everything that we do just a little bit more positive.
Yeah. Well, I think that's testament of why you are so good at your job, first of all, and why you're just a genuinely lovely person to be around and have to around either in person or on the internet or at a skanky hotel room at each. It was really skanky. It was actually quite nice.
It was actually a pretty nice hotel.
You also froze. I'm not sure if you can still hear me, but
I can still hear you.
Can edit you back in a second. There you are. There
I can hear you. Okay. Nothing stopped for me.
No, good.
You were saying very nice things. I'm like, bring it. Say all the nice things.
Maybe you didn't freeze at all. Maybe you were just looking at the camera. But Shawn, before we close out, I'm always going to ask my guests to join me on a section called Podcast and Shill, where you can plug, promote, do whatever you want. And I want to know where we can find you first. If people have heard your story and want to get more of the Shawn in their timelines, it might be.
You can never have enough Shawn in your timeline, and you can find me at Call Me Shawn P. Shawn being SHAWN. And then apart from that, I don't really much of a shill for anybody, but what I will say, throw your support behind independent websites. I really feel that my journey, it was a very important part of my journey and how I got here. Don't just rely on the IGNs and the GameSpots and the big sites. If you find people who do work that you believe in and you support independent websites. Give them a little bit of love. Give them a like. Give them a share. They need it. They need it to keep their heads above water. Don't crap on them for having a little bit of advertising on their site or whatever else. This is how people who get to where I am, who get to where you are, this is where we start out. Not everybody has that leg up. So support small people who really, really need our help. and honestly are sometimes the more passionate people out here working in this industry because they're working for peanuts. They really, really are. So, and apart from that, I don't know, maybe a shout out to my old business partner, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I have to say that's a very solid shield right there, Shawn. It's very good. And if to shield for myself, I am the Hashtagonist, and this is the Hashcast. Shawn, thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed this conversation, even though I get to talk to you every day. It's kind of on a different level. If we would talk like this, we would probably get in trouble if we were on the clock.
I don't know if we've ever had quite this conversation before.
No,
so this is a different level of conversation.
Yeah, so that's good. So like I said, thank you so much. Everybody, make sure you follow Shawn. And if you're still listening, I can't close out a show, but I'm doing it anyway. We'll be back next week with another cool guest. Bye-bye.